Okay, I know this is going to get really spicy, but I want to talk about it regardless. As someone who's a creative director and a creative, it's probably not a surprise for you two or anybody else that I've been holding my tongue and just silently rolling my eyes as the Virgo I am at some of these brand and creator fails, like Poppy's vending machine campaign. And I don't know if you saw the MrBeast Vegas experience that
Hmm.
turned out to be quite the experience. So I want to know, like, what brand and creator fails are living rent free in your minds right now?
I don't know if this qualifies as a creator fail, but it certainly was a campaign that was intended at, hashtag female empowerment, sending all the women to space. I think, and especially like Katy
Mm,
Perry, and then spending, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars when like all we literally want is affordable healthcare and equal rights. But sure, send them to space.
yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it is a good one. But one thing that I did think of, like, do you think it turned into such a big issue because they were women? Would it have been such a big deal if they were men? I'm just wondering because I feel like a lot of times when women do certain things, like, that gets so highly criticized. So even though, like, I was also thinking, like, okay, like, what the fuck? But then at the same time, I'm like, I wonder if there's extra attention on this because they are women.
The extra attention comes from the fact that at the same time they are defunding other space programs where literal funding and resources would have gone to female astronauts and women working in STEM, working in these areas. So I think it's a deeper conversation than just them
Yeah.
being women, but it also felt like faux feminism to me, and that's kind of what like
Yeah.
ground my gears.
I love that this got spicy right away.
You said it was going to
But
be
in case
spicy.
you didn't, exactly, I knew that it was going to get spicy, but in case you didn't catch it yet, this is the topic of today's episode. We want to talk about social crises and what brands and creators are doing to get into some of these messes, and maybe even how some of them could avoid them in the future. We're going to put that on the side for a little bit because there's much more to talk about there. But I want to bring it back to brands and creators specifically. And I mentioned the Mr. Beast example, I mentioned Poppy. And if you're not familiar with what happened there, Poppy obviously got a lot of backlash for sending these full sized vending machines to influencers as part of their Super Bowl campaign. And obviously, people, had the opposite reaction than what I think they thought they would because it just seemed really wasteful. These things were gigantic, and it's just contributed to this movement of like influencers and the same people always receiving these massive packages that are just exaggerated to the point where you're starting to question, like, what's the point in this? And the Mr. B's Vegas experience was an interesting one. I don't know, Christine, if you want to shed the light on that
Yeah,
one. I know we talked
yeah,
about that a
sure.
little
I think
bit.
it was a little bit of a fire festival-y type of thing, not as extreme, I would say. But the attendees were very disappointed because they were promised this exclusive, amazing experience in Vegas and, surprises once you get into the room, and that surprise was just a box of chocolates. And so people were obviously very mad and
What kind
took
of
this.
chocolate, though?
That's what we want to know. There is no amount of chocolate that is going to make up for the fact, like, if I pay a
No.
lot of money to do like a VIP experience. And I think there were some like quality concerns with food there, and so overall did not really match his, like, isn't he, like, he's famous for giving out millions of dollars on
Millions of
YouTube.
dollars.
And
Yeah.
so, like, I think, and that's a great lesson for us, when your experience or content for that matter does not match the vibe and the brand, that's when people are gonna revolt. That's when we're gonna get the sort of the Marie Antoinette effect on social.
And I think a great example of that brings me to something that us three, have talked about a lot is the tone deaf rebrand of Pretty Little Thing that happened a couple of months ago.
It was so bad.
Uh, for anyone who doesn't know, like, Pretty Little Thing, they tried to swap its kind of like this bold, affordable, kind of like clubby vibe for this fancy, quiet luxury makeover. And let's just say, like, fans were not impressed. No one was impressed. Like, even people who weren't like consuming their products weren't impressed. So like loyal customer felt kind of like left out, as the brand leaned into this kind of minimalist, more exclusive
Like
look.
fake
And
luxury.
yeah, kind of fake luxury, like featuring like, I don't know, like just like certain type of models, like even that changed. And to make it worse, also prices went up, but the quality still stayed the same. This kind of polyester
Wrapped in a
crap that
bow.
they typically use. Yeah, but and people were really quick to call it out, and saying that it feels very fake and very trend chasey, like PLT just slapped a new outfit, like this kind of new rebrand, without doing
Hmm.
the real work of building a true new brand identity. What are your thoughts on this?
I think they were just like, oh, Gen Z is becoming more conservative and modest. Now let's capitalize on that, and we'll be right in the cultural zeitgeist. Again, we've said this many times, but you have to do your homework as a brand, otherwise you're going to end up like PLT.
Yeah, I think they're not the only brand that's trying to use this quiet luxury, old money aesthetic as a facade to then rank up prices to sell more stuff to people. And I think they didn't expect this response because obviously quiet luxury and old money aesthetic are things that people are liking right now, and they like the vibe of the more luxurious clothes, but they didn't really understand as a brand what they've stood for, and they already ignored all of the complaints that people had in terms of quality. And so those things just don't mix well, and very, glad that people actually spoke out about that.
Hmm.
But this is a great segue into digging deeper into why some of these brands and creators get into these messes. Like, what do you think? All of these three examples are very different, but each brand missed the mark on some level, whether it was execution, tone deaf, not understanding the context around the brand, not staying true to who they are. But what are some other reasons why you think some of these brands and creators are getting into these messes and being called out by the audiences?
So brand marketing in many ways is called building worlds around a culture and building sort of these almost like universes where consumers step into. I think there's a conversation that I cannot stop following on social right now, and it is around the fact that all of these luxury bags are actually made in China, and then they're only sent to Italy for like three stitches and a logo. And now all of these people are saying, no,
Mm.
we're going to go directly to the wholesale and the factories and buy them from China if it is the same thing. And it's caused I think luxury brands as a whole are going to be in a major crisis if they're not already. I think we saw Gucci revenue fall some 75%. I think like something, no, or maybe 25%. I might be exaggerating. Please
75
Google.
sounds
No,
crazy.
please, that was Tesla. Please Google this. But either way, they're like their sales are down drastically, and I think because there's this deception between the thing that the people thought they're buying for, they were buying into status, and the status is actually just a wholesaler in China. And I don't know, like has it actually changed the way you see these luxury brands now?
Yes and no, although I'm not as deep in that discussion, but I did see I think maybe you have shared the Loewe bag assembly, or someone sent it to me,
I sent it to
where
you,
you
yeah.
could kind of see their content where they're like putting together the tomato bag, and people are like, you left the part out where you showed all the hardware and stuff coming from
Mm.
China. And I think it's just exposing things that we haven't thought about for a little bit. Like, obviously, a lot of these brands are doing that, and there's obviously a huge counterfeit culture. But the problem is that as like the rising cost of things has probably brought those two things closer together, and we're starting to question like, where is the value coming from?
Hmm.
Because some of these luxury brands did make everything in Europe and sourced all these amazing materials, but now we don't know anymore where all of that stuff is coming from. But again, it's a slightly different kind of crisis, I think, than some of the ones that we're talking about. And as I think about the reasons why brands get in these messes, like even this one is related to not being transparent
Hmm.
and not having the understanding that people on the internet can figure things out these days. Like, you're not going to get away with the stuff that you maybe got away with back in the days. And it's also challenging from an organizational perspective because your product teams, your brand teams, and your social teams are completely siloed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how do you make sure that you're managing some of those things together when, your social team may have no clue what the truth actually is either, but they're on their front lines of figuring out how to respond to people in these comments. And a lot of brands are also missing the mark on how they respond and making it a bigger problem for themselves. So I just think it's interesting to think about, if you zoom out, why they're struggling in general, but then also failing to answer. Because I think about Poppi and I'm like, there's so many things that they could have done after to make things better. Like they could have really been transparent what they missed the mark on. They could have
Mm-hmm.
pivoted. They could have done so many things. I was just thinking about, like, where could you have donated some of those
Mm-hmm.
vending machines, and like what you could have done around it to really just own up to your mistake. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I like what you said about just like zooming out a little bit. And my mind also went into like when people even come up with these ideas, when people came up with this Poppy, like a creator campaign, I honestly wonder if they had the right people in the room, like in the first place, if that idea was exposed to enough people, and if the people that were exposed to that also like were even bold enough to maybe raise some of these concerns. Of course, like, sometimes you just can't foresee some things, but I do think that it's really important to have the right people in the room and like have the idea exposed to a diverse amount
Mm-hmm.
of people that have a really good understanding of social, of the creator space, of the certain risks that it could carry. And of course, like, you still have to be able to estimate the amount of risk, because if like everything can carry a risk. So if you're always just walking scared, you're never going to do anything. But I do wonder if they had the right people in the room. And I feel like a lot of times when these big failures happen, like either they didn't have the right people in the room, or people were maybe too scared to even like call out some concerns that they might have had, and then just kind of went with it. Like maybe whoever was leading the project was so passionate about, and everyone, maybe they had this kind of like I don't know what it's called, like authority bias or whatever, where they're like, oh, like they must know better, so like I'm not going to even raise these intuitive concerns that I'm getting. So I think that's just like a good reminder for everyone to like express their concern, especially when we're talking about creator campaigns of this level. And even in general, like even like a small, one-off creator video can turn into a big scandal. So it's just something like it is good to keep in mind, like what is the level of risk that this carries without getting too scared to not do anything.
I'm going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here. I'm wondering if the Poppy campaign was launched during a time where people were not feeling so insecure economically and feeling like frivolous spending and going extreme
Mm-hmm.
is a marker of something deeper. Because I actually think that it is like it's not that tone deaf that, okay, you said soda vending machines as a soda company. That's a fun idea on paper, right? And I think
Yeah.
if they would have
Mm-hmm.
come out with this in, say, that like first boom after the worst of COVID passed, when everybody was getting hired and, people were feeling the joy of going out again. Like, imagine if it was launched then. I think everybody would have been like, oh my God, this is such a fun campaign from Poppy. So I think it's
Yeah,
also a question of timing.
I think you have a point there, and something that we talk a lot about is the bubble. Obviously, you've got people in agencies that are in major cities that are coming up with these ideas, or even internal teams. And, you can't think about your ideas just from the perspective of yourself. And as a creative, it's really hard sometimes to separate yourself and your bubble from the audience you're creating for. And to your point, people are feeling the pressure financially across the country. There is a bit of an issue of like someone who's not necessarily feeling that coming up with ideas from
Mm-hmm.
their perspective, or thinking about, oh, this is a fun idea from my perspective, but not understanding the context around them. But that's always going to be a challenge, and the best creatives don't create for themselves. You
Mm-hmm.
don't represent the audience most of the time, and so it's a pretty hard line to juggle as your
Hmm.
as a creative director too when you're reviewing ideas, because to your point, on paper and on a slide it sounds shiny and nice, but who's going to be the person to, sorry, Finn wants to participate.
Finn has a
I
I
lot
think he's
of
agree with
saying,
I
or
agree with
crisis.
him. Yeah.
yeah, I think he agrees, that that would not be a good way to go about it.
And I think one major thing that I just wanted to touch on the Poppy campaign is the fact that like uh yes, all those things that you were said were completely valid. I think if they like I think that the issue that was there was because it was those vending machines were giving to the influencers who already kind of seem to have it all. Had they just tweaked it so that the influencer takes it to the public, whatever is the influencer's favorite location in town, like maybe a park or something, they take it to the public and they invite their followers to come there, and they can all, it's going to be there the entire day or entire week, and like people can just get free drinks, like poppy drinks, and meet the influencer. Like I feel like that would have had a completely different type of reaction. Like I don't think that would have been an issue, but the fact that these vending machines were delivered to their homes to people who seem to already have it all, when the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the people feel like we are just kind of trying to survive. I think
It's
that
the
was
same
what
thing as the
turned it into
Haley
such a big
Bailey let them
fiasco.
eat cake. Like it's that same
Yeah,
kind of
Yeah.
reaction.
exactly.
Well, I'm glad you talk about the creator in this moment, because the one question I've had in my mind too is like, what's the responsibility of the creator in these crisis situations? Another example that I saw the other week is that Revolve is getting a 50 million lawsuit for not following the FTC creator guidelines, meaning that these creators are not transparently disclosing that they're doing a paid partnership
Hmm.
with the brand. So who's at fault here? Is a bit of the conversation. I think it's absolutely fair that there's a lawsuit like this, and
Hmm.
they have been a brand that's leaned quite heavily on creators and influencers.
Hmm.
But who's responsible in these situations?
I think what we always forget about creators is that people think that, oh my God, we're working with these like professional content creators, which many of them are. Yes, they are businesses of one, but a lot of the time they're also people who like blew up 2 months ago, now have like a lot of followers. They might be very young, or might not like, again, like might not come from the world of corporate or business. Like all of us, like we know most of the rules by heart because we've had to have those conversations with the legal teams of the brands that we work with. These are just
Yeah.
like regular people a lot of the times, and I think it's first and foremost it's the responsibility of the brand and of the agency to ensure that content does not go out that violates the guidelines, because I do believe that FTC is specifically suing Revolve for that,
Yep.
right? Are the creators also named in the suits? I didn't look into those details.
I'm not actually sure, but I think that that's the interesting part, that like as
Mm-hmm.
a creator, when you're creating content, you do need to make your decision on the risk that
Mm.
you're going to take on. Even
Mm-hmm.
though a brand is asking you not to do it, I think there is a responsibility to know, how that can affect your audience, right? Another example of
Mm-hmm.
sort of the creator part, that I've been thinking about is the conversation around skinny talk and some
Oof.
creators getting canceled because people are just like, do you understand how much sort of bad this content can do to somebody? And from their perspective, they're just like, well, I can do what I want. And there's been some creators that are just like, well, if you don't like it, then don't watch it. But I think there's a larger effect, that creators can have on young women, for example, and the message they're sending. And so it's an interesting discussion, even from that point of view, that you're getting canceled, but you're like, well, it's not my fault that you're triggered by this, especially when it comes to topics like that. So I do think that there's a valid conversation to be had about the responsibility that the creators actually have in deciding where are their lines going to be, even in this FTC thing. Like, as a creator, deciding like, I'm not going to stray people, by not being clear that this is a partnership, right?
I do think that as a creator, once you grow a platform, whether it started as a side hobby or as a passion project and you just really wanted to make it as a creator, you do have to recognize that as your followers grow, your words have impact. it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to mess up and do mistakes, but it does mean that you can't pretend like your content doesn't just exist in a vacuum. And honestly, the difference between getting canceled and growing through it usually comes down to one thing. Are you willing to really actually own your shit? Like, people don't expect perfection. Like, no one does. Like, it's okay to fail. They just want you to care and to be honest and to like be open with your audience. So like I do think that I've seen so many different examples of creators who have been able to own their shit and apologize and say like, hey, I did a mistake and I learned from this. Thank you so much for educating me and like calling me out, like what I did, or this brand collaboration, like it actually, like, I didn't even realize how wrong it was, whatever. Of course there's a it's a whole art of doing that, but like it does have to come from like deep like honesty and like introspection. But then there are those creators that you mentioned, Yanni, who are kind of like, oh, but like, I need to make my money somehow. And it's like, it's like, it's kind of like my followers responsibility what you decide to do with it. And even like, I don't know if you've heard this drama around this. I think she's the biggest TikToker in Australia, Anna Paul. She's also an OnlyFans creator. There's this, her ex best friend has been exposing her on TikTok, and like I've been like just looking through the summaries because the story is really big and juicy, but basically like there's just so many problematic things that she has done with her younger followers, and kind of
Mm,
like leading her younger followers to her OnlyFans to get participate in this kind of lottery, where they could potentially win money, but in order to do that they have to subscribe to her OnlyFans channel. It's like very controversial,
it's like
and
a
like,
pyramid
and
scheme.
it's like a pyramid scheme,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. She's not owning up to her shit. So like, as someone who was this very like, you know like widely loved creator and like seemed to be like super authentic and real, like all of a sudden is now like this other
Hmm.
side of her is getting exposed and called out.
But then also,
Yeah.
I I do worry a little bit about this sort of like fall from grace content. I'm not saying not to hold
Mm-hmm.
creators responsible, but the whole idea of other person being able to blow up by digging dirt on somebody else is something that makes me feel a little bit icky about the creator world.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
were just for this specific example. The person who was calling out was already also big on social. But I do
Yeah, no,
agree
no,
that there
no.
are some people, but there are some people who do that,
Hmm.
where they grow their platform by canceling out other people, and it's kind of like, is this really giving you
Like,
like
are you really the
purpose? Like,
Robin
it's,
Hood of social media, or are you just
yeah,
like chasing
by
Mm-hmm.
clout
doing
as
this,
well?
yeah.
And the skinny talk thing, I have so many thoughts around this because, again, like I want social content to be safe, especially for like younger women, women of all ages. But then also at the same time, I kind of like I keep finding myself also asking the question that isn't feminism also the freedom to, like, if you do like a certain aesthetic, you want to have the Pilates body, you want to be 110 pounds, if that's what you like and you want to do it and you're an adult, should you not be able to express it in a kind of like, is there even a responsible way to do that? I don't have answers to that, but that's one of the questions that I
Mm.
keep asking myself is like, are we then only allowing body positivity? And if there are pockets of people who are like, how is that different from being a bodybuilder, for example?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that discussion is a little bit different because
Mm-hmm.
the sort of crises or so-called crises is more, people deciding that this isn't aligned with their values or what they
True.
expected from a person, where we think about, this Revolve case, or even I was digging into Chia Faragni,
Mm-hmm.
charity drama and a case of like misleading people into believing that they're contributing to a charity when they're
Mm-hmm.
purchasing things and then that blowing up. Like, I think there is a difference between
There is.
those like brand creator
Like,
moments, and I think
don't
we're
run a scam.
specifically focusing. Yeah, exactly. We're focusing on these sort of legit mishaps of
Mm-hmm.
like, no one really thought this wasn't a good idea type of moments.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point of view, I want to talk a little bit about like what are some of the very concrete ways that both brands and creators can combat this crisis mode. Like, how could they review or vet ideas? How could they avoid things like this from happening consistently to the brand?
Just avoid echo chambers. Like if everybody around you looks like you, is from the same socioeconomic background, and maybe even like your team, you're all working towards the same financial goal, like maybe going outside of that a little bit. And even if like use chat gpt, put the idea in chat gpt and act as this type of audience or this type of a person, and like give me sort of the devil's advocate side of this thing. What could go wrong? Like if it, even if you don't have access to live people, you do have access to at least tools that can help mold your thinking. I'm not saying that like an AI can represent different people, but I'm saying like maybe it can ask you the questions that you need to ask.
Yes, 100%. Like, get more perspectives where you hit the post. We already talked about that. Or especially if you do a whole rebrand, maybe do some testing. And we're looking at UPLT. Like, maybe, I don't know, I haven't followed their journey. I don't know if they had already done some like testing with some certain like quiet luxury, like clothing drops. Who knows? Maybe they did. But anyway, like if everyone, but yeah, so like you really need to try to avoid those like blind spots. And another thing is like not every trend is your trend. Just because something
I love
goes
that.
viral or
This.
it's blowing up right now doesn't mean that it fits your brand. Sometimes the best move is just knowing when not to jump in. Like I feel like restraint is underrated in this time and age. Everyone's just thinking like oh, there's this trend, how can we
Clip
jump
that.
in? Like no, the first like you should assess, is this a trend that makes sense for your brand? Like let's assess that first. Like does it make sense? Do you have do you have any voice in that space? And if it doesn't, like just move on and like look into some other things that are bubbling under.
Yeah, it's interesting because I work in social media, but in some ways I have a hate relationship with trends because
Mm-hmm.
there is a false sense of urgency. I think that trends contribute to
True.
brands, especially when you think about social. There's a misconception that the faster you react to something, the better you are and the more praise you'll get. And then we are resulted with sort of the same exact post from every single brand on Brat Summer, and maybe individual teams were like getting a pat on their back, like, oh my gosh, you did this so fast and we got it out so fast. And like there is a sort of instant reward and instant engagement there, but like that's not really going to move anything along for most of
It's not
these
going to build your
brands.
brand unless
And
it's really
exactly,
in your
exactly.
DNA.
And to Mel, your point, like if you also do it blindly, there's a risk involved because
Mm-hmm.
people are going to be confused about why are you even talking about this. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it's very positive, but I fully agree that like don't just try to follow, like come up with your own stuff as well and don't just rely on trends. Okay, lastly, I know this may be the spicy part of this conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
I think we already started talking about what Poppi could have done better. Like, how could they come back, or how could they, be transparent about the fact that they failed? What are some tactical ways that you think these brands can, come back after they've been canceled or called out for something?
I think we need to have a real human response and maybe even feel like somebody is, maybe a rep even from the brand coming out and talking not in legalese, not in the sort of the PR drafted response, but feeling like okay, you actually heard what people had to say. I think that's one side of it, but I think also the other side of it, and maybe maybe this is really bad advice, but I sometimes think if there's like a controversy that like more came from a place of like, okay, somebody in the audience had a like boring moment and then it blew up. I think sometimes it's also worth just like standing in your truth. Not if you did something like horrible or something wrong, but if like there's also worth in just doubling down, I guess. Maybe that's
Yeah,
horrible
I
advice.
love a no, but I do love a good comeback. And I think when
Mm-hmm.
someone messes up and takes real accountability, like no PR fluff, like none of these like fake notes, like app apology, like that we're seeing, it can be really powerful. Like actually, like I was talking about Anna Paul before, and she created this apology video, and like she was like in a way coming from her heart. It seemed like she hadn't actually even consulted anyone because of the how bad it was, and that was also like everyone had an opinion on it, and it was really bad. I do think that you still need to consult people and make sure that you do it, appropriately, instead of like, okay, let me just sit down and be vulnerable and honest with people. No,
Yeah.
like there's still an art of doing so, and also one of the part of the art is reflection. You need to reflect on what actually went wrong, like instead of just jumping in to try to
Agreed.
fix things. So like, and that is a big part of the process, and I feel like a lot of people they just panic, and they just try to fix it. So they just like hop in and like, it's okay to take, a couple of days, few days to like reflect on like, okay, what actually went wrong here, like what did I do, and then consult other people, like how can you like even, you know like how can you, like what's the best way to communicate that to people, not in a way like what is the best way for you to get out of trouble, but what is the best way to bring out the truth, and also turn that moment into something generous or
Yeah.
creative. That's even
Yeah.
better.
Hmm.
And I think, Yanni, you had a great example of from Seta
Yeah.
Active that you mentioned and you
Yeah,
talked
I
about.
was going to mention that I think this may be a slightly different take, but I think that I'm completely done with apology videos. I've seen the super cuts of like every single creator's like teary-eyed apology video on YouTube that I don't even have the attention span to watch to the end. And I think we're forgetting, whether you're a brand or a creator, that there's creativity that is needed in how you approach it. And I thought that Set Active did a super interesting pivot when they recently released their bloopers collection. They had some problems with their sizing, and they'd produced a new collection, and they had to make a decision apparently, where do we sell this or do we not, and lose all the work that went into it. But they basically turned that into a whole campaign about the bloopers, and then just created education around how the sizing is a little bit off in this particular case. And so I think that they obviously didn't get called out for it first and then pivot. But sometimes, if you're smart and creative, you can kind of think ahead and turn a situation that could be negative to an advantage for the brand. And I
Hmm.
think that was such a great example. And there's been
Hmm.
others too, but there's always actually an idea in there versus an
Hmm.
apology video. And I think that's the key.
I like that.
I think this is a spicy topic, like I've said a million times, and we're talking about, a pretty negative topic in general. But I do still want to hear your pitch of the house ideas related to this topic, and how brands could do better. And I can start with mine, because as I was thinking about this episode and doing a lot of the research, I may be dating myself a little bit, but I feel like we need a real business book that unpacks some of these fails and what led to them for brands and maybe creators, along with different kind of strategies to deal with it. Like, all of the books in our space are pretty high level, and I haven't seen anything written about this. And even some of the cases we're talking about are almost like mini case studies, but there's not a lot of thinking
Maybe we
around
need to write it.
how to manage it. Exactly. So I'm just putting it out in the universe.
Hmm.
If someone's listening who wants to collaborate to bring this book to life for us, that would be great.
And I'm gonna
Um,
build. I'm gonna build on your idea, Yanni, because when I was thinking of the picture in the house, I was imagining kind of like a Netflix docu series, called
mm,
like "We Fucked Up," and I think it can be like I think it can be created in a both book format as well as Netflix docu series. So again, it's for those brands who are willing to stop pretending and actually own the flop. Like they go back to the real moment they got dragged for. They really show the receipts. Bring in the people who call them out, maybe on social or wherever, and instead of reacting with some legal approved like statements, they actually collab on the response. Like they actually like own their shit, and they admit that we fucked up, and like this is a story, and this is how other brands can learn from my experience. So it's basically, Yanni, what you exactly said, except in a documentary
And now
format.
we have a name for it too. Great.
It's practically written already, guys.
Yeah.
I have one for a brand. So Tarte Cosmetics, they always catch heat for their influencer trips for, being out of touch or something happens. I want them to 10x it. Do the most out of touch influencer trip you could ever think of. Like I want like I don't know, mountains
Mm.
of caviar at breakfast. I want like completely gilded iPhone cases for from like 24 karat gold. Like go all the way because you're always catching heat. Why not play on it, turn it on its head, and turn it into a concept?
I kind of dig that approach, like really leaning into it as
Mm-hmm.
well and not shying away from some of the decisions that they've made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought that I'm going to be probably think about all day. But this wraps up our episode on crisis mode that brands and creators get into all the time, and we'll be on the lookout for the next one because they literally happen every day. But you're listening to House of Content, and if you loved this episode, share it with someone, leave us a review, and then we'll meet you next week.